Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream presentation. My name is John. I am the Tattooed Historian. Welcome to the Tattooed Historian page on Facebook or on YouTube. We appreciate all of you being here. Tonight, my special guest is Peter Belmonte. Peter is a retired U.S. Air Force officer and a freelance historian. He's a veteran of Operation Desert Storm. He holds a master's degree in history from California State University, Stanislaus. He's published articles, book chapters, reviews, and papers about immigration and military history, and has been a college adjunct instructor of history. Pete has written numerous books, including two that we are going to go over tonight after we discuss a lot of other things about being a historian and / working in the history field. So, Pete, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you, John, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this because we have a lot to cover in the next 50 minutes to an hour, and not just your books. And I want to showcase the books real quick for everyone to see. Peter sent me two of his books, which the first one is Forgotten Soldiers of World War I, America's Immigrant Doughboys. I gotta get in the camera. There we go. I gotta remember which way do I move. Is it this
way?
Right. And then one that's near and dear to my heart, Days of Perfect Hell, October to November 1918, the 26th Infantry Regiment in the Meuse-Argonne. I'm a huge Meuse-Argonne fanatic, I guess you could say, because I had an ancestor in the Argonne, and we're going to go over both of those books later on. But Pete, thank you for sending me those. That was really kind of you, and the inscriptions inside were very kind as well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, I want to start off from the top, really, Pete, and that is asking, how did you get into history?
Yeah, I've always been, probably in common with a lot of historians and history buffs, I've always been interested in history since grade school, and always been interested in military history. And then when I was in high school, probably a freshman, I found a sword in my grandmother's closet. Now, she lived with us, and I don't know, I was getting something out of it. I found a sword that was wrapped up in old shopping bag paper. And I vaguely remember, I saw this as a tiny kid. So I opened it up and looked at it. I'm like, this is a cool sword. It's an American sword. So off to the library I went and got every book I could find about, weapons. I got the Alba's, Revolutionary War sword book. And I found Francis Lord's Civil War book about Civil War collectibles, or I can't remember. I have a copy of it over there, but anyway, I looked in there and I saw it said Horseman and Brothers, Philadelphia. They made the staff and field officer sword, and that's the sword I had. Wow. It was marked on there, and and I said, well, this is great. Now, nobody in my family was in the Civil War. Someone had, and I knew this, someone had given. My grandfather had worked for a wealthy family. He'd been a gardener, and they had given him possessions when their son was killed. Anyway, they gave him some things, and the sword was among one of these things. And I said, well, this is great. So I started reading everything I could about the Civil War. And like you, as you were saying, well, other kids were goofing around. I was trying to find used bookstores to buy another Bruce Catton book. But yeah, so that kept me in with the Civil War and in history in general. I wanted to major in history when I was in high school and going to college, but I couldn't get anybody to tell me what a historian, what I could do with a history degree. So I joined the Air Force instead. After a couple of years of that, I said, you know what, it'd be better to fly than what I was doing. So I was able to go to college. They let me out early, go to college. I majored in math. Was working in the Air Force. Never forgot my love of history. Was always reading, studying military history. And then was able to get, fortunately, one of the places I was at, I was able to get a master's degree in history, which I thought, perfect. This is what I wanted. Right. And from that, I developed, writing and teaching and things like that.
Do you see your master's degree kind of like I do, is kind of like that's the sweet spot? That's where you're kind of like, that's your zone. You don't want to go any further, and you're glad that you got that far.
I do. In my case, I did want to go further, and I have one semester of doctorate degree credit to me. I have that one semester, 4.0. So, but I had for whatever reason I had to stop. But yeah, the masters, and I want to kind of put a plug in for that. I know history is a field actually where you can make strides and make contributions without having a degree at all. But I want to put kind of a plug, if you're able to, financially, and you have the desire and the time, because it takes time, desire, and money, I would encourage people to try to do that. There's things you can do online. There's military history master's degree from, I think, Norwich.
Yes.
Yes. So you could, if you can, for a few reasons. One, you have to go through the discipline of applying and getting accepted, which is not always easy.
Right.
Maybe it is easier now. I don't know. But
right.
You will study things that you maybe don't want to study in history. You learn about the philosophy of history, the theory of history, historiography, different theories of history. That gives you a good background, I think. You have classes, like my history degree was international relations history, but I was interested in military history, but I had courses in the history of the Soviet Union, East European history, Eastern European economics, the history of Mexico-American relations. So it forces you to kind of look at a broader array of things. It also forces you to work with others, not forces, but I mean, you are allowed to work with others. You get an idea what other people are doing. It's kind of fun, if you like academics, it's kind of fun. So that's my kind of plug for that. Plus, I think it opens the door. One, it'll allow you to be an adjunct instructor. I don't know many places you can be an adjunct without a master's. There may be some places, but at least you can do that. And I was able to do that, use that master's and instruct as an adjunct. And I think it kind of opens doors. You could be just as knowledgeable without a master's. But if you're trying to do something, present a paper at a historical society, or maybe submit an idea for a book, or appear on something like this, or whatever, it adds a little credibility, rightly or wrongly, but I think rightly in a sense, because it shows that you've done the discipline. And especially if you're going to do something within an academic world, like maybe go to present a paper at an academic conference. So if you can do that, I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always considered the internet in general, but the social media platforms and live streaming and stuff to be leveling that playing field. But that doesn't diminish the training that you receive. It also doesn't mean that people should be shut out for lack of training as well, because we've had people on the live stream who have high school diploma. We've had PhDs and people who have written 40 some books. And everyone does it a certain way, but I totally agree with your mentality of, or your idea of going and getting that training if you can, to understand historiography, to understand proper ways of research and doing that, because you basically are a detective after a while, trying to locate all this stuff. And the training helped me greatly. The traditional route helped me greatly. I know that there are people, maybe some in the comments tonight or other evenings, who feel that the traditional route of doing history wasn't for them, but the training was worth it. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And I have thought about adjunct positions in the past, still do, because I love being in a classroom environment. So who knows, that may happen someday. I'm not sure. But with that in mind, how have you utilized your master's degree, your training in other capacities other than the classroom? How's it come in handy for you?
I think it helped in attending. I don't want to say I wouldn't have been able to get into these conferences without it, but I think it gives you a little bit of a credibility. Again, like you said, I know people that they made themselves an expert in something, never went to college, but they are the go-to guy or gal for this topic, and that's what you have to do, whether you get a degree or not.
Right.
But I think it's helped me with that. It's helped me, no doubt, with doing things like book reviews. When you write to somebody and you say, "Hey, I want to review books for you. I like history." That's good. But if you said I have a master's in history and I presented papers or whatever, it gives you just that, maybe that little extra edge to get noticed. So it's done that. And once you write about it, the first one I did was on Italian-Americans World War II for Arcadia publishers. And that was in 2001. And that in turn opened a little more doors. And to give you an idea, wrote that in 2001. Fast forward to 2017, I get a call from somebody who says, we understand you wrote this book. I found this book, Calabrian-Americans in World War II. I'm a producer for Netflix. Would you like to do a commentary? They were doing a series on Medal of Honor, men that won the Medal of Honor.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let me think a second. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was something I've always wanted to do since I was that teenager watching these shows on public television.
Right.
So they flew me out there and I was able to do a commentary on one of the men who had earned the Medal of Honor. So that's just an example of things. One thing leads to another and kind of opens doors. And books are like that too. Since you have one under your belt, it's easier to say, hey, X publishing house, here's what I've done. Here's the conferences I've been to. Here's my book. Here's things like that. Here's, so I think one thing leads to another.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And it's been, for myself personally, it's been a little bit of a different kind of path where now I'm not asked to come to a conference and talk history. I'm asked to come to a conference and talk about how do you do history in a digital format for branding. And so every historian, or a lot of historians like you, myself, and other people we've had on here, our roads and paths diverge in so many directions. And so many people believe that when you become a historian, you're just going to teach, or you're just going to write, or whatever else. And there's so many other opportunities out there that it's just, you never know what that phone call or that email is going to be next. And I think that's why I enjoy doing it independently, freelance, you know.
And I think you're blazing a trail there. And you give opportunities to people like me and others I've seen on your podcasts and broadcasts like this to talk, and maybe somebody's maybe not be interested, somebody will be interested, and it just furthers everything. And I think it's a good thing. Yep.
Thank you. Speaking of going that route where it's a little bit non-traditional, if you will, or it's a little bit, I don't want to use the term rogue because it's not anymore, but self-publishing. This is something that I've been told that I should do. This is something you've done. This is something others have done in the field. Talk to us about making that transition into self-publishing.
Absolutely. And these, you can see, I did the same thing you're doing. I'm looking at the wrong.
Yeah.
These here are the ones that I did through, it was Create Space at the time. Now it's KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. So my area that these are written in are very narrow focus. And I figured I'm not going to get an academic publisher to be interested in this, but I want to do it. And I want to publish the results of my research. So I finally did it myself. So I take kind of a broader view. It's probably you do. And if you're going to do this self-publishing, I don't think you necessarily have to have some incredible thing to say about today. I don't think you need to say, here's a lesson that we learned from this, and here's what it means today for immigration history or our war on terror or whatever. That's good. But I think I like to say history is everything that happened to everybody. And if you can find something interesting to say, like I said, if you found this niche or whatever, if you can find something interesting to say about it, I think that's valid. And hopefully I would encourage people to try to write well. I think I do, but we talked about it earlier. It's like, well, you thumb through something now, you're like, boy, I could have phrased that a lot better. But if you write well and you can do it at least in an interesting manner, I think, go for it. Now, with this, anybody can write 24 pages of drivel and have it on their shelves.
Right.
But strive for a little better than that. And I think Kindle, like I said, this is the only one I use, and it's very easy. It requires you to format it. You probably hire somebody, but I did it myself. And if I can do it, still proverbial. If I can do it, probably almost anybody can do it. But you can get photos, and there's a limit. There's a size limit. I don't know what exactly it is. Megabytes, kilobytes, terabytes, whatever. But
right.
And you get formatted yourself. You can have it different sizes. It's all paperback, the ones I do, and it's all free. You could do what they used to call vanity publisher, where they do it for you, but then you pay X amount of dollars and you get a book. But this is all free, and you can, like I said, if you put it out there and you realize I blew this sentence or I misspelled this, you can upload another copy and you're off. It's bad, it takes a few minutes, takes a while, but then you're off. So I would encourage people. And again, if you have something, it doesn't have to be any groundbreaking, whatever. And even if something's already covered, but you have maybe new sources that, and this is where knowing part of the historiography is important. If you have new sources that haven't been covered, do that. Go ahead. And if you don't think, maybe try for a traditional publisher if you think it's that rises to that level. It's kind of a lot of work to generally to put proposals together, and you wait and you wait and you wait, and then you get the letter, or maybe you don't get a letter.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I'd try everything. If you have something that you think is worthy either of a self-publishing or whatever, try it. Just try.
Right. I want to bring a question in from the audience on Facebook. Thank you, everyone, again, for tuning in on Facebook and YouTube. Robert Baumgartner, have you found some of the more traditional academic publishers shy away from your CV due to self-publishing?
I haven't found that yet. Now, I've tried. I went to the academic publishers and did not get any bites for my first book, for second book, Days of Perfect Hell. And since then, I have a co-author for a couple of the ones, Alexander Barnes. And he and I have been relying on Schiffer. We did also McFarland. We got another one coming out through McFarland. So we've had fine with them, and that's fine with me. I like the idea of an academic publisher, and I really don't know that they would look askance on the self-publishing. That said, I'm happy I have the ones that weren't self-published to put on, for example, a package that I was putting together. I don't know. To me, it wouldn't bother me if the guys would look at these as self-published. But at least I know somebody's read and looked at my manuscript and said, I can make money publishing this. So.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like the pattern that I've developed where I'm trying to get my fingers into everything. And it's like, it'd just be natural for me to be like you, where it's like there's self-published and there's academic press or whoever else to do it, because then you cover both of your bases, right? You're like, oh, well, I've got both. You don't have to worry about what the CV how it may appear to someone. But that's a great question, Robert. Thank you for that, because we have to think about the perception still to this day of, are we still being seen as historians? Is this the way historians are supposed to operate? Even though I'm totally against, the thinking that way, it's still prevalent, and it's still because the traditional sense is still controlling a lot of the history field. Although I know some people who wish, that it could be rogue like I usually am, but we're not near there yet. That's our generation away. I've put a link to Pete's Amazon author page in both YouTube and Facebook, so you can see some of his self-published works on there as well through Kindle Direct Publishing. But I initially wanted to talk to Pete about a couple of his books that he sent along to me. And as many of you know, I'd done a lot of First World War interp and spoken about the First World War for a while now. And one of the things that I loved to discuss was how our military was full in the ranks of a lot of immigrants and at that time. And the first book I'd like to go over, Pete, if you don't mind, is the Forgotten Soldiers of World War I book, America's Immigrant Doughboys. And once I have you introduce this, I'm going to put a link to that in the comments section as well. But this one's brought out by Schiffer and Schiffer Publishing. Pete wrote this with Alexander Barnes, as he had brought up Alexander earlier. Fantastic book, Pete, because it's very readable, and it's also visually appealing on the inside, because you got some amazing photographs and just, and here we go. I'm checking out what camera angles, color and black and white photographs and all kinds of stuff going on in here to appeal to the eye and give biographical stories. What made you want to write this book?
This is an outgrowth of my study of Italian Americans in World War I, which is an outgrowth of my family history. And so as I got into that, I wanted to document that more and more and more. And I met Al, I think online. Again, there we are online, right? I've never even met the man. We talked via Facebook. and emails and phone. So so he also was an author beforehand, and we kind of commented on each other's work, and we said, hey, how about a immigrant soldiers book? And we took off with it. Schiffer agreed to it. And so we did that. And I was just always been interested in that. It's kind of combining my ethnic and immigration history with my military history interest. So I was loving it. Schiffer actually had us cut a bunch out of there, so there was more to go in.
Really?
But you figure about 20 to 25% of the soldiers and sailors and all were immigrants. Then if you add the sons, probably to a lesser extent the daughters, but the sons, here's a guy, the sons of these immigrants, you'd have huge numbers. But it is, as it is, it's huge. Even enemy aliens, many of them were drafted. They weren't supposed to be drafted, right? They had to register, but they weren't supposed to be drafted. Some of them did make their way in. Usually they got sent to, what's that fort in Minnesota, to be held, and oftentimes they were just discharged. They may not even have wanted to be discharged, but they were. And you think of German immigrants. Well, German immigrants were probably the largest number to come over in the history of the United States, whole history, or at least until that point, let's put it that way. And how many of them, now many of them became citizens and were allowed to serve as normal. And you think of the composition of the army, pre-war army, a lot of Germans, a lot of Irish, Norwegians, lesser number of Italians, more later. But so anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. But yeah, the huge numbers of immigrants of all kinds. We tried to get as many as we could in there from Africa, China. I don't know if we have any Japanese. We might have some Japanese in there, and of course, most of the European. Got a couple of South American, I think, the Jamaican. But yeah, we tried to get as many as we could in there, and their stories vary from, run-of-the-mill service to, of course, Medal of Honor, men who earned a Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, many Silver Stars, things of that nature. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting story for me as well, because one of my ancestors, served in a National Army division, the 79th Division, draftees, loaded with new arrivals, as we'd say, because they're from Philadelphia, Washington, Baltimore, and they're coming into the port. And a lot of these guys are, serving alongside people from the quote old country, and now they're going back over to Europe once again to fight and all this. So it really appealed to me in that sense. With writing that book, were there any characters that you really enjoyed reading about, like their service or getting into the service, stuff like that?
I think some of the mundane guy, I hate to say it that way, but just guys, nothing comes to mind offhand. But just here's you think about an immigrant who comes over in 1913, maybe 1914, maybe even 1915, and they barely, maybe they know enough English to go to the store. But hey, a lot of Italians, for example, specifically Italians, they can shop at a local neighborhood store that people speak Italian. So they knew enough maybe to talk to the foreman in English, and they're drafted. And what happens? So they want to, they go, okay, and by the way, a lot of the aliens, if you were an alien, you could request exemption. But for some countries, we had a reciprocal agreement. So, for example, if an Italian requested exemption, he would have to agree to kind of be subject to Italy's draft laws.
Oh, wow.
A lot of these men they didn't know, or they were drafted anyway. And here they are. They couldn't speak English very well, and they tried. They did their best. And that's the kind of thing that appealed to me. And I think of my own grandmother's cousin, Luigi Santelli, again, a guy who came over in 1914, was in Kenosha, Wisconsin, working in a tannery. He's drafted, and he, from Kenosha. I spoke with his nephew, and his nephew told me he liked to joke, the Army sent him all the way to Kentucky, from Wisconsin to Kentucky. And he spent his time there, was in a development battalion, and just did his duty. These guys did the best they could. And development battalions were created in 1918 to take care of. So many men were coming in who either couldn't read English, or maybe they were American born, but they couldn't read and write, things that you needed to know to be a soldier, effective soldier. So they have these separate. Before, they just did the best they could before they either got discharged or kept getting shunted around. But they started this as a progressive era, right? The end of the progressive era, where they started these development battalions to Americanize these men, teach them, try to teach them English, try to teach them to read American history. There was a whole other bunch of development battalions for men who were injured, ill, for whatever reason, weren't physically able to. And there was a whole separate venereal section for those cases. And all these, by the way, were segregated, white and black, or white and colored in the terminology back then. But yeah, I mean, these guys just went in the development battalion, did the best they could, and then they passed a law. Congress passed a law in May 1918 to allow expeditious citizenship. So you didn't have to file a declaration of intention and wait 5 years to file a declaration and then become a citizen. You could right then say, I would like to become a citizen. And thousands and thousands of men became citizens.
Was that part of the effort there was this whole movement at the time to remove the hyphen? Everyone's like, we're going to take out Italian-American, you're just an American. We're going to take out German-American, you're just an American. Is that part of that process, even though I'm sure the men wanted the citizenship anyway, and they're fighting for it in their new land and everything? But does this also have another motive where it's kind of like we want this hyphenated American stuff to stop and go forward?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the sort of the progressive era. Many of that you just kind of look at it back now, and a lot of this paternalistic overseeing of people, but. I think intentions are always great, or usually great. But yeah, I think that probably 100% Americanism and things like that, which is fine. But try to distance yourself from the old world ways.
Right. Yeah, I know that there was an officer. Excuse me. There was an officer in my ancestors unit who wrote that when they got to Camp Meade in Maryland, he heard 42 different languages being spoken. Yeah. And it just shows you this is the melting pot of America at that time. And we read about New York City in the early 1900s and all and all the major urban environments with immigration and Ellis Island and everything. And now you're getting it transferred into the U.S. Army, the Navy, military life in general. It had to be a confusing thing, and there had to be flare-ups of people saying, who's the real American here?
Yeah.
And I've crossed that from time to time too, where people write that they don't know who a real American is now because there's so many different types of people here. And so like, we must all be Americans then.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up a good point also in that I always say, put yourself in a position of an immigrant, pick a language, pick a nationality other than English, Irish, but just an Italian or whatever, Greek. And they're drafted in either the late spring of 1918. So I have a case study of a bunch of guys from Kenosha, Wisconsin. Some of them Italian, others were Russian. There are a lot of Russians there. Drafted in May, the end of May. They go from Kenosha, Wisconsin to Rockford, Illinois, Camp Grant. So that's a couple days. They're in process. All this stuff takes a while. Anybody a veteran knows this. Takes a while to come in, this, that, and the other thing. A few weeks later, they say, okay, we're taking a draft of guys from Camp Grant, and we're sending to Camp Custer, Michigan, to fill up the 85th Division, which is getting ready to go. So 2,500, I don't know how many, a lot of guys get pulled, a lot of these immigrants, shipped over to Camp Custer. Got to go through the whole process again. Now you're in processing at Camp Custer for a couple of days. How much training are you getting? Not a lot of good, effective training, and I hardly can speak English. Now, all of a sudden, we're leaving Camp Custer to take a train to port of embarkation, Camp Mills, or wherever they're going. There's a week. They get to Camp Mills. There's more. You swap out uniforms. You do this and that. I don't have a mess kit. You're issued a mess kit. New guys come there. New guys that are from the draft from Camp Mills Depot Brigade are sent in. And now you're on your way overseas. You get overseas, you make your way through England maybe, or you go right to France. You're there, and lo and behold, the 85th Division is now a depot division. So now they pull guys out of the 85th Division and send them to combat divisions for replacements. So a guy's drafted on May 28th. By the middle of August, he's in a combat division. How much effective training has he had? None, really. Maybe a week, 2 weeks, because you consider all the paperwork, the inoculations. I'm sick because I got the inoculation, all this stuff. Travel overseas, travel within France to get where you're going. And now all of a sudden, I've got to fit into the 1st Division, for example. These guys have been through Soissons, they've been through, Cantini, and now they're going to look at me, who can barely speak English. But there were guys. I mean, there was already guys in 1st Division that were in the same boat, but they had already been there. But now I got to fit into this, and to the credit of the veterans, they said, "Yeah, we need these guys to function. It would behoove me to have my platoon function." But within a few weeks now, they're at Saint Mihiel, undergoing combat. So I put myself into there. I'm like, how do you feel? Especially for an immigrant, but for anybody, any of us being dislocated. I'm a clerk one day at the store, the next day I got a rifle. It's just interesting to look at that.
Yeah, when we say that this military force is underdeveloped, that's an understatement. They're going in. Some of these guys have maybe fired one clip of rounds out of their weapon.
Yeah,
and that's about it. And then they're going into, extreme combat for early 20th century, total war, modern war. We often have this argument, when was the first modern war? And we all debate that as historians and all that stuff. But for those guys, that was modern war. And you're sending them in there with, a 30-06 round or something, and they've only ever fired it maybe 5 times.
Yeah.
And now they're going in there, and
there's
replacement certificate are tough.
A lot of records of men coming into the 1st Division, 77th Division. I'm sure every other division the sergeants had to show them, how to properly load, how to throw a grenade. Maybe none of them hadn't thrown a grenade, So, and you talk about the 79th Division of all, and they had a lot of immigrants in there, but a rookie division, they had probably the hardest task for the first day of the Meuse-Argonne. And I think they probably got more of a bum rap than they deserve as a division. But and that's a whole other interesting thing.
That's a whole other live stream.
Yeah, it is.
Because there's actually people who are now defending my ancestors' division finally, instead of making them like the the ones who dropped the ball at the Argonne. It's like Montfaucon is not an easy place to go.
No, you don't stand against it. Yeah.
For your first fight, you're a green trooper, and now you're going up against that. Speaking of the Meuse-Argonne, the largest campaign in U.S. Army history to this day, you wrote Days of Perfect Hell, October through November 1918. This is about the U.S. 26th Infantry Regiment in the Meuse-Argonne campaign. I'll put a link in the chat for that in the thread. When did the idea of this book come about, Pete?
This was tied with my research on family members that were in the American military in World War I. Quite a few of them, cousins and distant cousins and things like this. But early on, I found one of them, Private Antonio Giorno. He's actually born in Kenosha, but he went back to Italy as a young child and came back. He had served in 26th Infantry Regiment, and I found an award card that he had been awarded a Silver Star for gallantry in action during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Now, back then, you didn't get the Silver Star medal. There was a Silver Citation Star. So if you were mentioned in general orders of a brigade or a division or what have you, you could use that documentation to have a tiny Silver Star affixed to the ribbon of your victory medal, or as they didn't have a victory medal at the time they started doing this, but they knew there was going to be a medal, and they could affix this little Silver Star. Anybody looking could say, oh, this man was cited for bravery. Later in 1932, they said, if you have that star, you can exchange it, if you will, for an actual Silver Star medal that we know today. It's the 3rd highest decoration for bravery in action. But anyway, I found this, and I said, well, this is interesting that he got this awarded the Silver Star. And so I started looking. I said I couldn't find anything specific. So I said, what? Let me look at the regiment. Let me see what the regiment did in the Meuse-Argonne, and I can get an idea. I get a feel of this. And I started looking and researching. I kept gathering more information. And fortunately, the field messages for that division, for that regiment, were preserved for the Meuse-Argonne. And those are messages sent by the junior officers back to the battalion and regimental command in the heat of combat. So I just kept going and going and putting it together, and Schiffer said, sure, we'll publish that.
You go down a little rabbit hole there with those messages, and that's it. It's like looking up old newspaper articles for some people. And they just immediately are like, I don't know where I'm going with this, but we're going to find out.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right.
This was not the 26th first real fight, correct? Right. They had been at Soissons and other places before that. with this particular battle with the Meuse-Argonne, how did they see it any differently than the way they saw previous stuff, or did it come across differently, or how did it come across in these dispatches?
Yeah, if you read the dispatches in any of the other, and I didn't do as heavily investigative as I did a little bit in Saint Mihiel and less so in Soissons, but they're roughly the same. Having read accounts of quite a few regiments and divisions, the first division had their act together at the start of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Now they had a lot of replacements that came before Saint Mihiel, but these men at least had been through Saint Mihiel, which was not as terrible. Mm-hmm. Easy to say, I'm not there, but not as terrible as the Meuse-Argonne.
Right.
So they had their stuff together, so to speak, and it was always a good division. And they performed very well in the Meuse-Argonne. They lost a lot. And I like to think of it as, I guess, bloodily effective. They were effective through brute force. So yeah, but anyway, they and let me just sort of set the stage. We can kind of set the strategic stage for the Meuse-Argonne. I mean, that goes back to July. You're talking about Soissons. This is the Franco-American offensive that drove the Germans out of the Marne salient, right? So from that point on, Marshal Ferdinand Foch wanted to keep the Germans on the defensive, which they were from that point on. And he had a grand strategy, grand vision where they would continue to push. And part of that was the Saint Mihiel offensive in September. The British in Amiens in August of 1918, those were also part of it. And then you get to Foch's kind of grand offensive. And his idea was to start in September. I think he wanted a more or less simultaneous advance from really the Argonne or the Meuse-Argonne area all the way to Flanders. It ended up being a series of 4 or 5 days sequentially because of logistics or what have you. But and that was the final push. Now, even at that point, they were kind of thinking, well, this would get us. We'll try to get this is a rail line, right? The rail line that supplies the Germans in the West and the British and French area. We'll sever that. This puts us in excellent shape for 1919,
right,
to finish the war.
Right.
Of course, it ended up actually winning the war. So that's kind of the strategic background of that. And so going into that is a little bit different than from Soissons or whatever, as far as outlook. Probably for the guy on the ground with a rifle, same kind of thing. Right.
He still has that tunnel vision going on, and he only sees what's in front of him. He doesn't see it from 100 feet in the air. And,
he knows he has an idea what his platoon is doing. He probably has a general idea what the company is doing. Probably the remotest idea of kind of what the battalion regiment are doing,
Yeah. And this is a logistical feat, right? I mean, they're moving from Saint Mihiel, and they're moving quickly and efficiently as possible, I should say. Not, it's efficiently on paper, but I mean, they had a logistical nightmare for a little while getting to where they needed to be, right? Because this is thousands and thousands of men moving at one time.
Yeah, thanks to Colonel George Marshall, the chief of staff. He was. Oh, I'm back. Okay. They dumped that on him. Hey, you need to pray. So he was like, I haven't even fought Saint Mihiel, what I'm planning. And I got a plan to get these people over there. So you're right. It's like 60 miles. I don't know how many tens of thousands of men and equipment. And division required, I don't know what long a motor train.
Yeah, it was about 22 to 26 miles for a new division. Now these guys have been bloodied. So 20 miles. Yeah.
Yep. So you're talking, and you're right. I think there were 3 main supply routes in the area, probably 1 per corps. Roughly east-west. And the supply routes going roughly north-south into the area. And they just quickly became overwhelmed, and the Americans took a lot of heat for that. Some of it probably is deserved. I think some of it is. Nobody was doing anything right then. Don't tell me that the French had no problems and the British had no problems. It's not true. So Clemenceau blew a vein. I mean, he tried to go there and visit, and he couldn't. He could never get to the army. And it's not funny, I guess. But I mean, he really was not pleased, and he wanted Pershing relieved then and there. I think Foch calmed him down. So it's not going to happen.
Yeah. If anyone wants to study logistics, and not scratch your head. Don't study First World War, because they had to be working with the cards that are dealt.
Yeah.
And in the moment, and like we said, a division, when the first division or the 79th, especially, these new divisions are coming online, the 77th.
Yeah.
They're trained from the beginning of and I don't mean train as in track. I mean the front of the column to the rear of the column is roughly 25 miles. And there's a couple, there's a dozen divisions moving at one time, and you're on a wagon road.
Yeah.
So imagine, we can't imagine what that looked like as far as like consistently we see the photos, but these guys lived that stuff. And if you're into logistics and you know how they should operate, don't read First World War logistics, because it's going to drive you crazy. It's like, why did they do that?
Yeah. And it's an unsung thing, but somebody's got to make that happen. Somebody's got to make it happen.
And I just posted on Instagram the other day a team they used to pull one particular wagon, and had a mule on one side and it had a camel on the other one, and it's in Chaumont in France. And it's like, that's just regular deal. If it'll pull something, put it on there.
If it works, yeah,
it works.
And men got out. Men got in the harnesses and pulled artillery pieces if they had to. At least, oh Lord,
Yeah, absolutely. What were some things, since you have the military background, you'll get this particular thing, lessons learned.
Yeah.
With the 26th or the 1st Division or stuff like that. What did they learn from that experience, as far as they're getting ready for 1919 for the big push? They're preparing. Were there lessons they were learning along the way that they were like, yeah, we got to remember this, or we better not do that again?
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with tactics, right? Mm-hmm. And that's another bugaboo of mine, the beating that Pershing sometimes gets. Mm-hmm. But a lot, it's true that the American Army largely learned on the fly, and the 1st Division, 26th Infantry Regiment in the Meuse-Argonne is no exception. Now, let's preface this by saying they seem to have learned it before. So, for example, instead of a platoon linearly charging a machine gun, have part of the platoon engage the machine gun while some other men go around the flanks to try to infiltrate and knock out the machine gun nest with grenades, rifle grenades, etc. Easier said than done. I'm here, and oftentimes, well, if you tried that, guess what? There's another machine gun over. The Germans weren't fools. They knew how to set up machine guns.
Right.
So all that easier said than done, but they learned that kind of thing on the fly to advance by rushes, right? We like to think of these linear lines, and there was a lot of that, a lot of linear, up and forward. But also in the approach, a lot of times they're in squad columns, right? So they're kind of like in single file, believe it or not, in squads as they approach. I guess the theory behind this is to minimize casualties until they can actually get into it. So they learned different things like that. Communications was a major problem all throughout World War I, which is one of the reasons why I get a little frustrated sometimes with people blaming generals of all stripes. Any assault in World War I any attempt to take ground was going to result in casualties. You didn't have the adequate communications for the forward edge of the infantry to say, stop the barrage, we're up to the barrage, move forward, wait, hold it, we're hung up, come back. You didn't have that. You maybe had a telephone, and I can describe the 1st Division's telephone ladder. But anyway, it was a couple guys with a roll of wire, and they strung it along literally from the headquarters until they got to the forward edge of the guy with the phone. Now, guess what happens when you have thousands of men walking over that and artillery shells? It breaks. Yep. Well, sometimes the telephone worked, sometimes it didn't. They had runners. Runners was the most reliable thing. A guy, 2 guys usually, with a message and an armband, so that MPs wouldn't bother them and send them back to the front. Right. So anyway, my point being that communications is always a problem, and that was a major problem. Outdistant the artillery communications with the infantry. There was no wireless. There was no voice wireless in the infancy. Nobody really used that on a tactical level on the ground. They had Morse code wireless, but again, a huge bulky thing for that kind of thing. So it was mostly telephone, and believe it or not, even blinker signals. But it was mostly telephone, pigeons, and runners. Okay, yeah. So
yeah. The pigeon. I always fascinated kids with the pigeon stories because they're like, oh, didn't realize that they would use birds, but that had been used for centuries, and it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we used them clear up to the Second World War, up until the beginning of that whole mess, and we already had radio and radio's in its infancy at this time. So a lot of people forget. It's easy for us to, like I say, hindsight's 20/20. It's easy for us to go back and blame officers, generals, stuff like that, and say, well, why didn't they stop here? Why didn't they move here? Well, maybe they wanted to, but until the message got there, that unit's decimated or that unit's out of line or whatever's happening. It is a strategic mess. And by this point in the war, when you're talking about the Meuse-Argonne, for the Allies at least, the trench warfare is basically over. This is open field push. Absolutely. And that's where the Americans get good, though. They're used to pushing in open field because they were trained in open field warfare. Yeah, and
the final push on November 1st was an example of that coming into play.
Yeah. This is the era, everyone, of I believe it's the end of September through the end of October is still the bloodiest month of combat in U.S. military history. It's at that time. It's during the Argonne, so it's a nightmare for these men. Yes. Pete, before we start to wrap up, I want to ask you a question about these immigrant soldiers and some of them being here with the 26th, some being in your previous book and other books you've written. When they're finished, what was it like for them to come home?
Really, the ones I've studied in depth came home and got their jobs and went back to work. I find some that have had most of them probably had, I would guess, problems adjusting, probably what we now call maybe post-traumatic stress disorder. I've seen some suicides. One man who served in the Italian army was wounded. He had been in the United States, went back to Italy, served in the Italian army, was wounded, came back to the United States, got drafted, and was badly wounded in the American army. And then in 1920, he was out of work, and the death certificate says accidental asphyxiation from an illuminating gas. But probably, who knows? I don't know. It says accidental illumination, but back then you don't want to, nobody wanted to talk about that. How you feeling? How are you adjusting? Nobody. Well, you're home now. Put your overalls on and let's get to work. And so that's mostly what guys did. A lot of guys became citizens, and some became citizens and then moved back to Italy and lost their citizenship. I find a lot of examples of that.
Wow.
But interestingly, and I find this fascinating. There was an American Legion branch in Italy all the way through the Second World War. I mean, I imagine in the Second World War, they probably weren't very active, right?
Right.
Veterans.
Not too welcome.
Yeah. But anyway, they would help guys. They would help. I've got a lot of documents where they help guys who went back to Italy and now they're applying for their Pennsylvania bonus, World War I bonus, and they would take it to the American Legion, and there would be a guy there to help them, an American veteran living in Italy, would help them fill out the paperwork and all that.
Wow.
So service, I think, in World War I did, if you want to talk about Americanization, I think insofar, I don't know how you quantify it, really, but insofar as the men came back, started families, did their jobs, got work, there was no, hey, I'm going to go to college on the GI Bill. It was like, well, hope you find a job when you get back.
Right.
So, I think it helped.
Yeah, and then I'm sure there were some of them with the bonus army and other places to try to do that because of the lack of the GI Bill. I mean,
yes,
the
and
idea,
that bonus is really frustrating because it was X number of dollars for every month. And then if you went overseas, and guys would fill out the form. They'd be like, oh, okay, I get $200. Well, you get it in 1944. Well, I need it now.
Right.
Fill out the form and whatever it was, 19,
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can sense the frustration. Come on, I need something now. You wait till 20 years from now, so.
Yeah, and it took another war to fix that problem.
Yeah.
And to bring the GI Bill into place and other things like that. So lessons learned from First World War generation still impact us to this day. And the right of assembly and the right to do all to protest and stuff like that has been going on since the beginning. But those First World War veterans did it right in DC, right on the mall, and stayed there. Their impact can't be overstated.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask before we go, Pete, is I put up your Amazon author page. What's a book on there that you like it's like picking a child, I know, but it's tough. I understand that. But what's one that you self-published that you really think people would enjoy? I'm sure they'd enjoy all of them.
Well,
but
yeah.
Everybody. One you'd like to highlight or something,
the ones I self-published are very narrow focused. Let me show you a couple, if I may.
Sure. We have time.
This is one that, brother. Okay.
There you go.
And that is, I discovered this fellow. You can see it says, The Roaring Lion, Father Leo Rizzo, a Calabrian priest in the American Civil War. I'm pretty proud of this one because there was nothing about him published. In the 40s, there was like a 10-page article published on him. But I happen to I do research on Calabrian-Americans. That's how narrow my focus is. That's a southern province of Italy. It's the toe. Right. And I found men who served in the U.S. military in the Indian Wars, so-called Indian Wars, 1890, Spanish-American War, Philippine insurrection, all the way through thousands and thousands of them in World War I. I've documented about almost 6,000 Calabrian-Americans. Wow. But I never found a Civil War guy. And then just recently I found reference to this priest who came over in 1860 from Calabria and joined the 19th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry Regiment and served as their chaplain. Let me see if I can. 9th Connecticut, anyway. I'm sorry, 9th Connecticut. And he served during the Shenandoah campaign in 1864. So I'm pretty proud of that. Now, if you have an interest in anything like that, please look that up.
Yes.
He spent most of his time in a hospital. He had typhoid fever. And interesting anecdote there, he was deathly ill. And another Italian immigrant priest, Southern sympathizer, visited him in his tent, took his uniform and credentials, and passed himself off as him, and he stole supplies, took him to the Confederate lines, and Sheridan was not happy. Sheridan thought it was Rizzo and wanted him court-martialed, but then a captain who had witnessed it said, no, he was deathly ill. So anyway, he escaped that, and supposedly got wounded. I'm trying to document the wound, and I document what I know about it in here. The beauty of self-publishing is if I do ever find it, I can update it, but
you can revise it. Yeah.
So that's good. And the rest of them a lot of them are more the Italian immigrants. Oh, one more real quick.
Oh, take your time. You got time. Sorry.
This is the one, again, Calabrians in the U.S. military before World War I, right? Now that's cool. The USS San Francisco. There was a bandmaster on there. A lot of Italian immigrants, period, served in the Navy in a band. A lot of Italians in bands, ship's bands. And one immigrant served on the USS San Francisco in Havana Harbor in the Spanish-American War. But I get in there, I document guys that, from the one Civil War veteran all the way through so-called Indian Wars. And I enjoy that because I feel like I'm giving this sort of unexamined area some play. I don't want to say I'm giving guys a voice, but in a sense I am, and this is sort of building block of who we are in America, immigrants, and certainly indigenous people too, but the immigrant aspect of it. And it's these guys didn't write about themselves for the most part. They're two actually did publish biographies, but typically they didn't speak English or write English well enough to say, here's my experiences in the Spanish-American War, for example. So I feel like I gather what I can. Once in a while you get surprised, you get a photo, you get a descendant you get a hold of, and you get a lot of good stuff. So it's a lot of fun doing this too, self-publishing. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for showing those.
Certainly.
To everyone yes, show and tell time. To everyone in the comments, I did place Pete's author page from Amazon on there, so you can check out all of his books that are self-published and books from Schiffer and others. We have Paul Lawson in the comments. How are you doing, Paul? Proud son of a Navy chaplain, 06. Greyhead Jen, her great-grandpa had PTSD from the Great War. He was with the 1st Division. There you go. Awesome. So, yeah, you're gonna want to pick that up, Jen. You're gonna want to pick this up then, because that's those guys right there.
That will give you an idea, even if he wasn't in that regiment. It'll give you an idea of small unit action and kind of what these guys went through. Right, almost hour by hour on a small unit level. It's pretty detailed.
Yeah, I appreciate that because it's down to the personal level nearly of these men, and it allows you to get in their head and be like, okay, this is what they would have seen. And, that tunnel vision like they would have had, you're seeing it on a regimental level, sometimes a company level, and you're understanding that this huge campaign is going on around them, but they're just focused on, obviously, where the direction of fire and all that stuff. And just like everyone everyone that I've read about who's been in combat, they're like, I saw what was in front of me. The officer was supposed to see what was around us, and that was it.
That's it.
So one more time with that. Days of Perfect Hell, October through November 1918. That's the U.S. 26th Infantry Regiment in the Meuse-Argonne. So if you have any ancestors in the Argonne, even if you don't, doesn't matter. If you're into World War I history, this is a great one right here. And like I said, that one hit home for me because I did have the ancestor in there in the Argonne. And then Forgotten Soldiers of World War I, America's Immigrant Doughboys. And obviously with Pete's author page, there are plenty more other choices for you there to cover more than just the First World War. As Pete just showcased to us, there's other eras as well. And I appreciate all your words, Pete, about your educational background and how you've gone about being a historian, how you do history, and self-publishing. And obviously your written works here really mean a lot to me that I have those in my collection. And I'm sure some people here will be heading on over there to check them out as well.
Good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, my friend. Thank you, everyone who has tuned in this evening on Facebook and YouTube. Again, all the links are in the comments section to the individual books that I just showcased on here, as well as Pete's author page, so you can check out all of his self-published works on there and other great information. So thank you all very much for joining us this evening. Please stay safe. We will speak with you very soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, and thank John. Thank you.
You're welcome.